Hey,
Hello. How are you
happy Monday.
doing?
Happy Argo Unpacked Day.
Happy sixth episode of Argo Unpacked Day. This is pretty exciting. This is the sixth episode. Super excited to be here with you, Dan, and also with you, Costis.
Hello.
It's your second visit here with us, Costis, but I will still ask you maybe to introduce yourself before we introduce the topic.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Kostis. I'm a developer advocate at Octopus Deploy, and I'm also a member of the Argo team, focusing mainly on Argo CD and Argo rollouts. And I always like to talk about controversial subjects and subjects that need a lot of discussion. So last time we talked about application sets and explained what you should not do. And today we're going to talk about Terraform. That's the teaser trailer. Okay, now you can continue.
I
Yeah,
will let Dan
Costas
ask his
is
question.
he didn't mention that he is also the author of the GitOps training and certification where so many of you have already learned how to use Argo effectively. He wrote like 95% of that. So definitely love working with Costas and glad to have him on the team. Like he said, today we are going to talk about Terraform and GitOps. And to introduce that topic, something that Costas suggested was that let's go back in time just a little bit. Okay. When we introduced the GitOps principles, if you go to opengitops.dev, we've got the GitOps principles. That was a whole process to build that, right? We had over, I think, 100 people contributing, over 70 different companies contributing to that. So it was really this big industry standard effort to create the GitOps principles. We had the term GitOps from Alexis Richardson, who had coined the term. And then we wanted to create something formal so that people knew, like, what does it mean to actually do GitOps? And so we created these GitOps principles, and we go out and we spend a lot of time working with that and promoting it and getting people to be familiar with it. And so now that we had this idea of like, okay, what was GitOps? And this goes back even to like what Alexis Richardson had meant by the term GitOps when he coined it, because Weaveworks was also part of that effort. We then go around and we're talking to people and we're saying like, hey, we're seeing this big interest in GitOps. People love GitOps. They're adopting GitOps. And I remember I was at a conference where I asked everybody, I was like, hey, who raise your hand if you're using GitOps today? And to my shock, the entire audience raised their hand. They were all using GitOps. And I was like, oh my gosh, we don't even have any more work to do here. This is amazing. And then I realized that some people might be confused by the term. And so I think I asked the question, like, keep your hand up if by using GitOps, you mean you use Terraform and you commit that to Git. And basically everybody kept their hand up. And then I went and started asking like, okay, how many of you have something monitoring resources and actually looking for drift, looking for differences between what's in Git and what's in production? And basically, 90% of the hands went down. And so it turns out that when they said they were doing GitOps, what they meant was, oh yeah, we use Terraform, we committed to Git. So when I run a Terraform apply, maybe I have an automated process that does that. But most people don't have Terraform live monitoring resources in that way, looking for differences, looking for potential changes, and ultimately not actually meeting what we talk about when we're talking about the GitOps principles. And so part of the handoff in today's episode is how do you use Terraform in an actually GitOps friendly way? How does it bridge into Argo CD and that application layer? How do we think about that? And there's been a lot of great content on this topic, a lot of it that Costas has written. And so that does that introduce the topic, Ravital? Do we have it covered? Anything I missed?
No. But I think it's a great opening, Dan. So thank you. And I want to ask Costis, let's start like from the very basics. Let's talk about what are the GitOps principles?
So yeah, we have said this many times, but I think it's important. I actually have them on the screen, Revital, if you want to show the screen. The GitOps principles were created by a working group, so it's not just us as a company. It's many companies, including Weaveworks. So even if you don't believe us, Weaveworks, which was the original company that created the term, also was part of the working group. And they are written in a way that it's not technology specific. They do not mention any tool. They do not say use Argo CD to get GitOps. They just write general principles. There are 4 of them. And the first one is that your system should be declared in a declarative way, like you should have a declarative format. The second principle is that you should version your infrastructure and have an immutable storage medium for it. So not
Costis,
immutable stuff. Yes?
do you mind if I'll pause you for a second?
Yes.
Can you guys see the screen that I'm sharing? Because I can.
Yes.
It's showing up blank for me.
For me as well.
Yeah, so Kostas, if you want to remove it and reuse it, I know a lot of people join just on the podcast and just on the audio. You don't have to see these to.
Yeah, I'm
with
also
the content,
explaining
but
them.
For
just to
Costis'
make things
convenience,
easier.
we can
it
use
helps
them.
us stay on track.
Meanwhile,
try
I'll
again.
add some comments. We're getting some comments, so
Yeah,
I'm
shout
adding
out to
them here.
Troy, who's on LinkedIn and says a lot of people confuse GitOps with using Git. It's true. And Troy is in the GitOps Champions Discord that you get an invite to when you sign up for the GitOps training certification, and is one of our more active people there. Thank you, Troy.
Actually, a lot of people confuse
see you here.
GitHub with Git. This is also another big discussion. And they don't understand that the term pull request is not a Git term. Let me repeat this.
Yep.
There are no pull requests in Git.
That's right.
Let this sink in your mind. There are no pull requests in the Git protocol. This is a GitHub term. Okay, that's another controversial topic for another discussion. Anyway, can you see the screen now?
You did declarative, versioned, and immutable, and you were going on to number 3.
Yeah, number 3 is that you should have an agent that pulls automatically for you the let's say the desired state, and then you should also have continuous reconciliation. So it's not something that you do once; you do it all the time. It doesn't matter if it's every 1 minute, every 3 minutes, every 5 minutes, but you should do it all the time. So these are the GitOps principles. And now every time somebody says, "Hey, I'm using GitOps," you can ask the simple question: do you follow all of them? Okay, that's the $1 million question. So let's answer this question for Terraform. I will also make a brief parenthesis and talk about Terraform. If you have never used Terraform before, here I have an example. You can put this on the link, Revital. Essentially, it's a very popular tool. It's technology agnostic. It's not connected to a specific cloud provider and allows you to describe infrastructure using a special language called HCL, which is, I know, in some cases it might look like YAML or XML. It doesn't really matter, but it's declarative in the sense that you don't say to Terraform, hey, go into this machine, copy this file, change the setting. If you have worked with other tools like
Chef or Puppet.
Yeah, they work like this. In Terraform, you say, I just want a VM. Just go and build it. I don't care how. And behind the scenes, Terraform is using the correct API or the appropriate API according to the cloud provider that you need. And here I have a simple example with a VM. I think, no, this is a Kubernetes cluster, but you can do many things. There is also a Terraform registry where you can find modules. If you haven't looked at Terraform, you should. Okay, today we're making the assumption that you have some familiarity with Terraform, but it's a very useful tool. And also, as I said, it's something that transfers over from company to company. So, you can go and learn Terraform once and then go to another company, and you can also use Terraform and use Terraform again and again. Maybe there will be some differences if you change the cloud provider, but if you learn the basics of Terraform, like what it does, how it works, how to save your files, this is another big discussion that we are not going to have today, how to organize your Terraform files. It's a very useful knowledge to have. So go and look at Terraform. And as a disclaimer, okay, I love Terraform, okay? Here I'm showing a picture with me and a heart. I love Terraform. It's a great tool. I've used it in production, okay? It's great. So please don't misunderstand me and assume that I'm going to attack Terraform right now. I'm not attacking Terraform. I love Terraform, okay? So let's ask the question, does Terraform satisfy the 4 GitOps principles? And the answer is no. It actually satisfies only the first one. So if you remember the GitOps principles, the first one is that you should store your state in a declarative format. And Terraform does this. You create HCL files, they are declarative, and this is where you say what needs to happen, okay? There's no discussion there. That's fine. But every other GitOps principle is not satisfied. The second one, and I think this is the one that most people get confused, is that Terraform has its own state, okay? Its own state file. If you set up Terraform, usually you create a nested bucket or some other, cloud storage medium, depends on the cloud provider, and there you store your state, so it's not in Git. So if you ask Terraform, hey,
Go ahead. Sorry.
if you ask Terraform, hey, what is your view of the world right now? Terraform will not go to Git. It will go to its own state. And this file...
To a resource, right? A resource that is deployed.
It's many resources. You group resources in the state file. But the key point here is that not only this is not Git, but it's also mutable. This is a mutable, let's say, construct for Terraform. You can go and manually change the state after creation. And with Git, this doesn't happen. If you have a Git commit, you know exactly what is in that Git commit. You can ask yourself, hey, what did we have in production last Thursday? And if you're following GitOps, you can go to your Git repo, go to last Thursday, find the file and say, last Thursday we had this, this, and this. If you ask what we had to Terraform last Thursday, you don't really know. Last Thursday, there was a state file and somebody might have changed it. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about more the state, but just keep in mind the second principle is not honored. The third principle is also very simple. By default, Terraform is just a CLI. Okay, it's not an agent that you have in your cluster and it runs and it pulls state. It's an external CLI, and you run it on your own, and you run it in a completely different infrastructure than the infrastructure that you create on. So maybe you have Jenkins, and then you run your Terraform CLI, and Terraform creates some VMs in the cloud somewhere else. So it's a completely traditional way of creating infrastructure. Now, there are other commercial solutions that I'm not going to mention that change this way, and that's fine, but we are still talking about vanilla Terraform here. And by default, unless you do something specific, you run Terraform once. So not even the last principle is honored. You run Terraform. Terraform says, okay, what do I need to do? I need to create 4 VMs, and then that's it. It doesn't know anything else. So if after 5 minutes you go and manually delete one of those virtual machines, Terraform knows nothing at all, okay? You need to manually run Terraform again and again and again. So now, just, setting the stage here, it's only 1 out of 4.
Now, Terraform is going to create a state file when it applies that stuff that says this is what the am I jumping onto your? Okay, all right. I'm sorry, jumping onto your stuff. You go ahead.
You can talk, Dan. I actually
So the source of truth for Terraform is actually the state file, right? And that state file represents what is expected to be deployed, and that thing where people go and edit resources after the fact happens all the time. Now you might think like, well, no, like we told everybody, hey, they can't edit, AWS directly. They need to only use Terraform. But AWS actually will sometimes change resources, right? It changes the state of things. And so that state file can very easily get corrupted and sort of out of sync with what's actually deployed. So it's as kind of a source of truth, it's like not exactly the perfect thing. Now you could store it in Git, right? That's an option, but Terraform doesn't require that. And that's not a knock on Terraform or anything. It just means the whole point of this whole discussion isn't to tear down Terraform. It's to say, hey, if you want to do GitOps and you're using Terraform, here's the things you should be aware of, and here are things that you need to plan around. Right, here's how to actually get there toward the duds. Get it done.
So we had the disclaimer, okay? So again, we love Terraform. Okay?
Yeah, we love Terraform.
Terraform is a great tool. Okay? There's no question about it. I think where people are getting confused, like even if you ask people what they think about GitOps in general, even if they don't, remember all the GitOps principles, at the very least they should have the idea that you should have the guarantee that what you have in Git is also what you have in your cluster. This is what you normally want with Argo CD or Crossplane or other tools. And you also want this in a bidirectional manner. So if you want, if you make changes in the cluster, you also want either to discard them or, commit them and do something else. And with Terraform, this guarantee does not exist. Okay, if you go at any company and you ask what you have in Git and what you have in your Terraform state, maybe they are the same right now, maybe they are not. It doesn't really matter. There's no built-in mechanism into Terraform that has this distinction, which I think is important.
So when should I use Terraform and when should I use GitOps?
Wait, that's the next question, but let me show one last thing here. So on the screen, I'm also showing the Terraform state rm command, which is also another point that you can modify state, and this goes against the second principle. And this is a command that you normally don't use. Maybe you use it sometimes, but the fact that this command exists means that Terraform is not following all the GitOps principles. We forgot about this, Revital. As a final point, there is a great site which Revital is going to link, which is called Kubernetes Failure Stories, and this is ks.af, and you can, decide what AF means for you. And essentially, it has a list of Reddit posts or blog posts where people are explaining their production. Usually, it's production experience with Kubernetes. And one of my favorite ones here is if you search Spotify, you will find a presentation from KubeCon 2019. I'm pasting also the link there, where Spotify is explaining not one, but actually two incidents. And, we're not going to explain what happens here. And also, I don't blame Spotify for everything. But if you look at the presentation, they abused the Terraform state, and they did not understand how Terraform state works, how Terraform uses the state, and what happens if you change the state while, you don't want to do the changes there. So take a look at this. I think it's a super interesting story for.
But what was the end result here, Costis? Spotify
so here, essentially, they say that they lost. No, they had 3 clusters: one for US, one for Europe, and one for Asia. 3 Kubernetes clusters, and by mistake, they deleted 2 of them. They lost Asia and Europe, if I remember correctly. But Spotify continued to work because the US was up, so users did not have that much disruption. But this is an advantage of Kubernetes, not Terraform. This is the reliability that Kubernetes is offering. So take a look at the story.
Assuming they were using GitOps principles, could this incident be avoided?
Yes. So essentially, they talk about 2 incidents, and the first one is a bit funny. They made changes from the Google Cloud Console, from the UI, and he had 2 tabs open, one for production and one for not production, and he made changes from the UI of the production tab, thinking that it was the non-production tab. And if you are, following GitOps, you never really care about the UI. Everything happens via Git, so you don't, click buttons on tabs. You just go into Git, change something, then open a pull request, have some kind of procedure where people look at the pull request. So it's a bit, let's say, more difficult. I'm not saying, impossible, but more difficult to make a change to a production system where you meant to do a change to a non-production system.
Well, you have like automated tests, right, that are happening as part of a change flow like that, where it's like, and this is actually goes to their second incident, where they had a pull request that accidentally removed a definition for one of their clusters, and then when they merged it, because that definition was removed, and then the Terraform state was automatic, they did like an automatic Terraform apply. It then went and deleted that, which means that they probably didn't have some kind of diff plan preview as part of their pull request, which would have shown very obviously like, okay, delete this cluster. And they would have been like, oh, wait, hold up. What's this doing? And so like a lot of this stuff, to go back to your point, Revital, GitOps and Terraform is not an either or. It's that if you want to do GitOps with Terraform, there's a lot of additional work you need to do, and there's a lot of additional things you need to be aware of.
So why would I do that? That's my question. If I can
So you
avoid
don't
that,
have an outage
if,
like
if
Spotify did.
No, okay, let's go back a bit. And Revital, you can, stop sharing the screen. We're going to show slides later. As I said, Terraform is a great tool, but the problem here is that people abuse it. Like if you say you're adopting Kubernetes, you should also think what you will do in terms of infrastructure. And the, let's say, most straightforward way to adopt Kubernetes when you're using Terraform is to have a clear distinction and say, look, I'm going to use Terraform to create only the infrastructure. Okay, so in our case,
provision the
Kubernetes cluster,
resources,
and that's
infrastructure
it.
as code.
And then it ends, and then Terraform does nothing. And then I'm going to use Argo CD or Flux or whatever to work on the applications. So in this ideal scenario, Terraform essentially runs once. It creates your cluster, and then it ends and does nothing else. And developers don't even need to know about Terraform. Like they don't really care about Terraform. And the thing that they interact every day is their Kubernetes manifest in Git that Argo CD works. So whenever you want to make a change in the infrastructure, maybe you want to add a new node or change something, then you as the administrator deal with Terraform, and developers don't need to know anything about it. So it doesn't really matter if you're not following GitOps or not, because it's only you. I'm saying you, the administrator, compared to your own team, which might be 50 developers. So there is a clear separation between the two worlds. There is a non-GitOps world, but still declarative, where you use Terraform, and then there is a GitOps world with Argo CD. Also, you can test this on your own. If you go to the Terraform documentation and just search for GitOps, search for the word GitOps, you will find 0 results. So for me, it's a big mistake to think that a tool is following GitOps, where not even the tool itself, is saying that it's following GitOps. Like,
and we view it as like different jobs, right? So like this 2-tier approach, you have long running, mostly unchanged components like underlying infrastructure that Terraform is very well suited for. And then you have more frequently changing layers, which is like your applications where your developers are making changes, they're pushing changes frequently. That's where Argo CD is super good, right? Like Argo CD is perfect for that kind of use case, because having that sort of minute-to-minute monitoring, diffing, self-healing, all of that stuff becomes really, really valuable. And it's not to say that you shouldn't do GitOps for infrastructure. There are tools like Crossplane that you can do that with, but they have some trade-offs that you're gonna have to make. But with the Terraform here, that 2-tier model makes it so you have these different tools focus on the things that they're really good at. And so Terraform in that model, its job is really just bootstrap infrastructure and install Argo CD. That's it. And then once Argo CD is installed, then it takes care of everything else. Let's pause for just a comment or a question here. So Tony brought up that Kubernetes uses etcd for state if we consider Argo CD compatible with GitOps. So point number 2 needs an asterisk. So he's basically saying like, hey, we're saying that Terraform is not GitOps because state is in the state file rather than in Git. Would therefore Argo CD be incompatible with GitOps because state is in etcd? And I have an answer here, but I want Kostas, if you have one, why don't you?
I think the answer is what the tool is looking as the primary source. So Argo CD, when you want to do something, let's take the simple choice. You don't have self-heal or these options. It looks at Git. Like you have a whole microservice in Argo CD that it only fetches Git manifests. That's the whole point of this microservice. Well, with Terraform, this doesn't happen. The primary source of Terraform is its own state. It doesn't really care about what is in Git. Like you can use Terraform without Git at all. I mean, I can use Terraform without storing the files anywhere. Yeah. I just have them locally and I just run Terraform and I pass the files to Terraform and the files are in my laptop. Okay, so Terraform doesn't really care about this. While with Argo CD, and people have requested this, you cannot actually, diff with local files. You need to commit them to Git first, and then point Argo CD to a Git repository. If you know how the Argo CD application works, it takes a parameter, a Git repository, and people say, no, I want to put a file there. No, you cannot put a file there. You need to put it in Git.
Yeah, and so the source of truth for Argo CD is ultimately Git. Now you might, if you've just installed an application CRD directly onto the cluster, then yeah, that application definition isn't in Git, but what it's pointing to for its resources will be in Git. etcd represents the live state, right? So etcd is how the cluster represents its live state. So it's what Argo CD compares against. So in this analogy, Argo CD is pointed at Git as a source of truth, whereas Terraform is pointed at files, which may or may not be in Git as its source of truth. But its state file is always something that it has to build and create when it's doing a plan and an apply that is local to wherever Terraform is running. And you can store your state file in a remote bucket or in some, thing that is. And we're not advocating for people to start committing their state files to Git. I think that probably would be a bad idea. I don't know if people do that.
I think the problem starts when people abuse Terraform, and I will talk specifically about the Helm and the Kubernetes provider. So Terraform has a lot of providers for specific cloud resources, but it also has a Helm provider and a Kubernetes provider. So you can use technically Terraform to change resources in a Kubernetes cluster and add Helm manifests. So, and this is how you abuse it, because remember we said the correct way is to say, okay, I create the cluster and then it stops. Like I don't want to deal with Terraform anymore. People continue the Terraform process and they create applications there. And then they say to the developers, oh, you want to deploy an application? Yeah, you run this and behind the scenes Terraform run. So don't do this. Use Terraform only for infrastructure and Argo CD for your applications on Kubernetes. I think it's the easiest way possible if you don't continue to migrate to crossplane, which is for another Argo Unpacked Revital. Take notes, okay? Crossplane is for another episode. We're not going to talk about it now. But this is what you should do.
Amazing.
The scenarios that I see for people abusing the Helm provider is first where they just are like, I'm just going to install everything using the Helm provider because I'm completely bootstrapping everything. And we would say, hey, just bootstrap Argo CD and give it like a source of truth, Git repo to point at so that it can go and bootstrap everything else that's supposed to be on the cluster and let Argo CD just run it. But the second scenario that I see is people who want to pass a lot of values that are from Terraform into their Argo CD applications. And we touched on this in past episodes when we talked about secrets management, but they will say like, well, I have like some CIDR rules, or I have some other value that needs to be passed to these applications inside of Argo CD. Argo CD doesn't have that information. It's on the cluster, or Terraform has it. So I can just provide it through Terraform. And I don't mind if people do like, they bootstrap Argo CD and maybe they pass in like some kind of like a config map or something that's going to be referenced. But there are places in Kubernetes resources where you can't reference values from config maps, like metadata. You can't pull in metadata information from a config map. And Kostas, I think you know the use case I'm talking about because it's one we've talked about in the Discord a fair bit.
Yeah, Revital, this is also another Argo Unpacked. How to use Terraform and Argo CD together and pass values from Terraform to Argo CD. And there are several ways. Okay, we're not going to discuss this now, but I want to say that there you should ask yourself about the life cycle. Like ask yourself, what is the life cycle of the components, and make a decision according to the life cycle. So is this secret something that you change all the time? Or is this a secret that you create once, pass it once, and then that's it? Same for any kind of setting that you have your applications. And I even see, some people, I will say something controversial, they forget how DNS works. Like if you look at how DNS works and why DNS was created, I will take the most basic example. Okay, it's really simple. You have an application that talks to a database. And I've seen so many people that they try to create a database with Terraform, and they want to get the name of the database, which is auto-generated, and pass it to Argo CD in a dynamic way. Why do this? This is not, how DNS works. Just make an agreement that your application will look at your database at database.octopusdeploy.com. That's the DNS name of the database, and the application knows this name in advance. That's how DNS works. And then you have Terraform, and it can create a database anywhere it wants and just create a DNS record and name this database. So in this case, there is nothing to share. Like both parties say, hey, here is a database in this name, and here is where I'm going to search for the database. Okay, I'm not saying that this applies everywhere. Of course, you have secrets or roles or stuff like this, and they must be dynamic. But for me, you should ask yourself, do I really need this smart capability of passing values? Maybe you need it at 20% of the cases instead of 80%. Luke from the previous episode, I think he had talked about trying to pass the name of an Elastic cluster, like Elasticsearch needs to know the name of a cluster it's running on, and people wanted to pass this. No, don't pass this. Just make a naming convention. A cluster that is in production in the US East is named production US East. So pass this name to Elasticsearch or to any other, solution that needs a name. Find some kind of way of simplifying your life. Simplify your life. That's the goal. Simplify your life and don't confuse life cycles.
The other one that people talk a lot about is like workload identity, because that's another one that you can't reference from like a config map, or it has to be attached on the resource, like it's part of like the metadata. And this is where like I think a tool like Hiverno is pretty useful. Like you can actually use that to do to pull in like an injection webhook that will go and add in these components when the resources are created, so that you don't have to have that information beforehand if it's not committed to Git. Troy has another comment. He says, I absolutely agree that managing anything other than an Argo bootstrap on Terraform is anti-pattern. The remediation cycles and ownership models are completely incompatible. Yeah, I agree.
Yes, 100%. The life cycle. It's always the first question. What is the life cycle of this component, and how often do I need to change it, and who needs to change it? Is it something that I need to change, or the developers need to change? And you start abusing your tools when you're confusing the different life cycles.
Yeah, perfectly said.
Amazing. Okay, so I will actually be super happy, Kostis, we have you here. Maybe talk a little bit about the CodeFresh GitOps courses that you have created. I'm curious to hear a little bit of a history. Why have you thought about creating those courses in the first place? And I know that you plan to create all of them when you planned, when you thought about the content. It was intentionally 3-level courses created. So I'll be happy to hear a little bit about it.
But maybe we need to talk about where people will find it. So maybe post a link of learning.codefresh.io.
That's a great idea.
And don't worry, we're not done talking about Terraform. We're going to come back. Go ahead.
We will.
No, but this ties, well, because it comes back to the discussion about what is GitOps and what people really mean when they're talking about GitOps. The certification was created because we found that people came to us and they had the wrong idea on, what GitOps is, or the problems that they are going to find when they adopt Argo CD. So we're saying to people, hey, if you adopt GitOps and Argo CD in a really big scale, you will face this problem, and this problem. And they didn't know what we were talking about. So we said, okay, let's train people first. Let's help them understand what is GitOps. And then they can understand by themselves what, are all the issues and what are all the problems. And instead of writing just blog posts and saying, hey, this is a problem, this is a solution, we said, let's make it interactive. So the big point of the certification is that is actually a combination of theory where, you read for a problem just with text, and then you actually have a lab, like a real lab, where you get in your browser, in your tab, a real Kubernetes cluster with a real Argo CD instance, as real as it
With
gets.
zero effort, right?
Yeah, with zero effort. There
All
is
you
nothing
need
to install in your laptop. There is nothing to do. You can have a very old laptop that cannot even, run Kubernetes on its own. It doesn't really matter. It's all in your browser. We use a cloud provider for this. And this environment is created just for you, okay? It's just for you while you're running the exercise. It's not shared. You're not sharing this environment with other students. So you can, go play around, do whatever you want, destroy it, recreate it. That's perfectly fine. And after you finish the exercise, it is also discarded. And the three courses that Rubital is talking about, we released them in sequence. I think the first one was in 2022. And then the second one was in 2024, I think. And the last one was released in KubeCon Salt Lake last year. Essentially, they cover all the, let's say, levels like beginner, intermediate, advanced. So if you go to the beginner level, you will see simple stuff like how to sync applications, how to choose sync policies, how self-heal works. Then for intermediate level, we have lessons like how do you organize your GitOps applications, how you combine your manifest. And then the last one is enterprise stuff, and it has some really interesting labs like how to migrate applications between Argo CD instances with no downtime, a very popular subject. And coming back, to the discussion, essentially this also serves as a way for us to explain not only what GitOps is, but also what are the underlying problems that you will face once you adopt a GitOps, and also the mentality that you should have once you adopt GitOps, because you need to switch, from this traditional world. I run a command or a Jenkins job or a GitLab pipeline, and it creates something for me. And you go to the other way around. I have an agent in my cluster, in our case, Argo CD, and I tell it what to do. And then I sit back and I wait, and I wait to verify if things are okay or not. And you can pick individual courses, like you can skip the first one if you want. The courses are actually created in a way that you can skip like the whole course if you want. You can just go straight to the questions, and if you know the answers, you can answer them right away and get your certificate and your Credly badge. So we don't, force you to stay, and do everything one by one. This was a major decision. You can just look at the topics and then say, okay, I know this, I'm going to skip it. Oh, this looks very interesting, I'm going to do it. And people actually do this, like they choose only what they want to see.
And I will also.
I was going to say, in all of those trainings and certifications, we don't have a ton of conversation about Terraform. I think we mentioned it a few times, but it's really all about like that Argo CD application software delivery layer. We have been talking about, because we've seen it in our Discord community, we've seen it in Reddit, we've seen it in the Slack channels, and we see it in conversations with people about a lot of people kind of abusing Terraform to go into this layer that Argo CD is better suited for. And it creates problems for them. And so we've been talking about, hey, do we need to have like a module on Terraform that focuses on this? And there are also some community resources. There's one called GitOps Bridge that Carlos, who's been on Argo Unpacked before, has mainly been putting together. Have you spent time with GitOps Bridge?
Revital, you should place the link for the people to see. It's in the chat. Yeah, I've looked at it. It's actually one of the, let's say, three ways that I'm thinking you can combine Terraform with Argo CD. I'm not saying it's the best. I mean, maybe somebody else might prefer something else, but it's something that you can use as a starting point. Like, if you have no idea how to use them together, you can go and look. And Carlos, and the team, they have spent really a lot of time to put a great deal of, I wouldn't say examples, they are more of templates that you can take. So if you're working with AWS, you can go and look at an example specific for AWS on how to follow this this pattern. So maybe, maybe this is also another good episode for Argo Unpacked, how to use GitOps Bridge and what are the alternatives. But I wanted to go back to the certification a bit and talk about secrets. So there is actually one lab for putting secrets in Git in an encrypted form using sealed secrets. This is on level 1. And then because we got so many questions around this, in level 3, there is another work lab where we're using the external secret operator. And let me put this on the chat as well, where secrets are not stored in Git. And there is also another, big discussion whether this is GitOps or not. So we offer, both ways, and people can see what are the benefits, the advantages, and the disadvantages of it, and they can make a choice discussing about secrets. So it's up to you. Like some people might say, oh, I want to follow GitOps, so sealed secrets is the solution for me. Oh, I don't care about GitOps. I want to use secrets on my AWS on my AWS cloud account. So I'm going to use the external secret operator, and it will work just fine. And you can test it easily in the certification just with a real, Argo CD instance. You don't need to install anything. You don't even need to have a cloud provider connected. I think the example with the external secrets is using Vault, and Vault is installed as part of the lab as well. Like it's completely self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Yeah. And only today, if you'll subscribe to Argo Unpacked, we will be providing you a discount of 50% off for those courses. So go ahead and subscribe, and we'll find you.
And part of that layer, that secret stuff, we did talk about that in the last episode. It was all about secrets management with Argo CD, and we actually touched on
with Andrew 2 episodes back.
And we
that
touched
was the 4th.
Yeah, fourth episode. Sorry, we did talk about some of this tension of values injection using Terraform that leads to kind of Argo CD abuse, and where secrets can fit into that, and injection webhooks can fit into that. But that's such a common thing that we see, and it just like Terraform state just always gets corrupted. Not only that, not only does Terraform state always get corrupted, but it also it's easy to accidentally overwrite what Argo CD has been doing, because Terraform's they're like that boss that disappears and they come back like a month and a half later, and then they're start dictating all this stuff that you need to do, but you've already done all that stuff, and so they're just blowing a bunch of smoke and they just don't know what's going on. I'm sure if we tell you that doesn't sound familiar at all to you. You've never had that experience.
Not at all.
Actually, Revital, here is a good hint. If you talk to somebody and they have been using Terraform in production for, I wouldn't say for 2 months, but for a lot of time, maybe 1 year, you can actually bet if they have ever seen a corrupted Terraform state, or if they have ever used this Terraform RM command to remove things from the state. Like they did something with Terraform and then things were not what they were supposed to be, and they said, oh, let's manually change this Terraform state file on our own, okay? So you can bet some real money, and I will say 90% of the time you will win. Which I'm not saying, it's a bad thing or a good thing. As I said, we love Terraform, but it shows the problems that you also face when your tool, is looking at 2 places. It's not really 2 places, but when you have your Terraform files in Git and also your state file somewhere else.
There's 2 kinds of Terraform users. The first are those who have dealt with corrupted Terraform state files, and the second are those who will.
And those who have not yet.
But if they will be watching this episode, so they will not.
No, they're going to deal with it anyway. This won't fix that. This won't fix that problem but you can avoid the impact on the GitOps layer, on the application layer, by using Argo CD, right? So, so you're still going to have to deal with it when you're using Terraform. It's just part of the nature of the tool. And again, we love Terraform. It's not.
Definitely, but we'll use that for resource management.
Yeah, use it for the underlying infrastructure, and leave your application layer to developers. Yeah.
Let's see. Dan,
yeah.
Dan, one last thing. I don't know if you mentioned this for Argo CD version 3, but there was also a change regarding secrets and what is the proposal from the project. Have we talked about this in previous Argo Unpacked
A little
episodes?
bit.
Yeah,
a
and
little
we
bit.
can
We
we
touched
can
it a
I
touch
can
little
on
say
it
this
again.
again because I think it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So with Argo CD3, which I believe is scheduled to come out this week, I know Reggie's working on it, finalizing everything from the release candidates that have been out. But we did make an official recommendation about not injecting secrets in the process of manifest generation that Argo CD is doing, or certainly not in the process of Helm application from Terraform. And we don't talk about Terraform in the Argo CD 3.0 recommendations, but from a secrets perspective, we do take a strong opinion that you need to be using secrets operators like an external secrets, a sealed secrets, things like this that are going to allow a secure passage into your resources and not storing secrets in plain text on your inetcd. We recommend against that. Secrets stored in Kubernetes, of course, are just base 64 encoded, but that does protect against accidental revealing, which is the reason they're base 64 encoded. But the putting plain text values like that are secrets into Helm values arguments. Now, for example, okay, inside of what you should do with a Helm chart, right, is you should reference a secrets reference, right? You should reference a secrets value. But I'll tell you, inside of CodeFresh, when you install, if you have Argo CD already and you're like, we love it, we're having a great experience with it, and I want to now take advantage of CodeFresh for application promotion, environment promotion, I need to install the CodeFresh runtime agent alongside my Argo instance. It's going to give you a Helm chart, and it's going to have an argument that has a value file on it. That has like an API key in it. And the reason that that's there is when you install it, you first will do it directly against the cluster, but then when you as part of that bootstrap process, it will actually generate the secret, and it will give you back for your Argo CD application that you actually define. It has a secrets reference in it to that secret. So you can do that if you wanted to install that runtime using just completely declaratively. You could totally use that exact same flow where the Helm chart references a secret, and then just use your secret operator to populate that secret with the API key or whatever. It's just done for you, even though as part of the Helm chart installation, it will just do it when you do a manual Helm install. But after that, you pass it over to Argo CD to manage from there. But you could do it completely declaratively too.
So I have to say that you and Andrew had such a great session. It was Argo Unpacked episode number 4, exactly about that. And I also created a lot of shorts, videos from that episode, all about secrets management. You can find it in our YouTube channel. You can also see some posts in our Blue Sky, X, and of course, LinkedIn. All the content is there.
Because secrets is a very popular subject and everybody is asking the same thing. How do I do secrets? Yay.
And you know, it's amazing because in every episode, 5th and 6th, we will always be mentioning secrets management. So
I want to touch on something that
I was going to say, Troy says we're not being fair to Terraform, and he's going to fight us on Discord. I think he's joking. I think we're being fair to Terraform.
Troy would love Terraform. We said this many times. I'm going to say this again. I think it's actually one of the tools that even, if you didn't convince people about GitOps because we said it's not following GitOps, at the very least, it talked about immutable infrastructure. I think this was the major point for people that adopted Terraform, because until that point, they were using, 7 Puppet, and they had a single VM, and they installed one version, and then they installed another version, and another version. And if somebody asks you what is installed in this VM, you don't really know. And Terraform said, no, forget about modifying VMs. I will just destroy the previous version and create a VM from scratch, and I will tell you exactly what is in this VM. You should know. So Terraform was a revolution. Okay, not for GitOps, but for immutable infrastructure. So it's a great tool. We love it, and I think
Yes.
It was in the
it blew your
direction of
mind.
GitOps. It was a progression towards GitOps. It just doesn't do
Yeah,
all the
infrastructure as
doesn't
code
do
is a
all the-
subset of
Yeah.
GitOps. But I think immutable infrastructure is important on its own. Like, even if you look
Yeah,
at, let's
totally.
say, the history of cloud infrastructure or infrastructure creation, just going from mutable infrastructure to immutable infrastructure was a major point on its own. And Terraform is let's say, the tool to thank for this.
Shout out to Anais, who's joining us in the chat. Thanks for joining us. And then Ari in the chat says, ClickOps always triumphs. And here's the thing that we'll say about that.
Wait, Dan, ClickOps is what Spotify did. If you look, Revital, you want to post again the Spotify thing. The first
Yes, I
incident
will.
of Spotify was ClickOps. They
Yeah,
opened
no,
two
they
tabs
did.
and they started clicking buttons.
Now, there's an exception where ClickOps can be amazing. And it's if those clicks actually result in Git commits. So if you're using the CodeFresh platform, of course, and you go to create an application, it actually creates a Git commit. If you go to do a GitOps promotion, it creates a Git commit. So if the ClickOps is actually leading to Git, then it's awesome. Then it's great. Then it's perfect. And then Ari also says, this is why I use set ignore changes equals all for all my Terraform resources. So, Kostas, why don't you explain that joke for everybody?
I would say this is a double-edged sword. Like, there are some cases where it will destroy everything, and some cases where you might like it. So be careful how you use it. That's my explanation.
Yeah, well, I think if you ignore all changes,
I actually think this is the second incident with Spotify. Okay, I don't remember, but I think the first incident was about ClickOps, and the second was about modifying the state without understanding what everybody else was doing on the same state file. So go and watch it. We always come back to this Spotify presentation.
Yeah. So Ari, because you said you're going to ignore all changes, Troy is now saying he's going to have to fight the whole audience for their abuse of Terraform. So glad to stir the pot and create some controversy. So I think today, our episode is really just kind of about where Terraform fits into the life cycle and how it fits in within a GitOps world. It sounds like we maybe have some follow-up topics to get into
3 or 4.
both, Terraform to Argo CD and that handoff and living in a better world. So maybe we'll come back to those in the future. So make sure to subscribe at codefresh.io/Argo-Unpacked. Of course, you can follow us on social media, Twitter. I think we have a Blue Sky account. We're on LinkedIn. We're everywhere, right, Revital?
Oh, yes. Just Google Argo Unpacked and you'll find
us.
us.
And then we have another episode on the 19th. And the topic is scaling and Argo CD3. Is that right?
With Alexander, yes.
Yeah, so Alexander Godero is going to be joining us. He's another Argo CD maintainer, and he gave a great talk at ArgoCon around scaling Argo CD, which is a topic that obviously we've talked a lot about in the past, and certainly we've seen inside of the GitOps training and certification. We have a lot of stuff there, but he's going to be joining us. We're going to talk about just some of the different scaling components of Argo CD and different things that we see and run into. And of course, Argo CD 3.0 will be fully released to everybody by then. So we're going to have some conversation around how that release went, any issues people need to be aware of. And in the meantime, stay synced, and we'll see you on the social media. Any other things that we need to pitch or promote, Revital, Kostas?
I think if we create the controversy,
a fantastic job done
in the audience, it means we achieved it. Yet another, we don't want boring episodes where we say things that everybody agrees. We want, the audience to feel engaged. No, I hate this. I don't like this.
Now, before we take this last question and we sign off, if you want to continue this discussion beyond just social media, you can join our Discord, the GitOps Champions, You get an
Yes.
invite when you sign up for the GitOps training and certification. And we have some pretty good discussions in there. Troy is a powerhouse and has a lot of great points that he brings up in there. So big shout out to him. So, all right, we'll take this final question before we sign off from Ari. Question from a point Kostas brought up at the start. Pull requests are not actually Git. Right, they're GitHub. That said, many organizations require pull requests instead of commits directly to trunk. How do you handle the GitOps with Argo there?
So there are two kinds of pull requests. One is pull requests from developers, where they change the source code, and then it's your job to set up preview environments. And this is also another episode, Revital, where you use the Argo CD pull request generator and you create a specific environment just for them. Okay, so that's all that you need to do. Like developers, can view the pull request, they can comment on the code, they can run unit tests, whatever they want to do. You don't care about this, you just create an environment for them. Then for pull requests and manifests, you can also do the same thing, create a preview environment, but also you should run your policy tools, like check, if your manifest is well formed, if it follows the rules of your organization, if it does whatever you think that manifest should do. Also, diff, like understand exactly what will change, and this is also another episode, how to understand exactly what the change is coming. So by the time you press merge, this is a key point, you are 99% certain that it will succeed. You know everything that you need to know about this pull request. So this is just a formality. The merge button should not be something that you should be afraid of, because you should have all the information of what will happen, what might break, what will change. So do this. If you find pull requests with Argo CD painful, it means that you haven't done the pre-work of working with them, and you are still following GitOps. Like as soon as you merge, then the actual state will change and it will match whatever you have in Git.
And this point about pull requests not being part of Git, it's not a knock on pull requests. Obviously, the point was that these tools like Git are awesome, and then there are additional components that are built on top of to make using them a lot better. So GitHub adding pull requests, GitLab adding merge requests, which do the same thing, right? Those are the things that actually make this usable from like a life cycle standpoint. And it's the same way with Terraform, with Argo. You could there are additional layers of value that are being added by their tools. Rovital, you want to read this final comment before we sign off?
Yeah, great comment by Shashi. Terraform is a great provisioning tool, and you can sure use it to manage manifests and charts. I think it does a poor job of drift detection and reconciliation. GitOps tools like Flex and Argo are better suited for continuous delivery, as they have schedulers to detect change and drift. And basically, this is what I take from this entire discussion. I think it's a great summary.
Yeah, drift detection and reconciliation are GitOps principles 3 and 4, which we said in the beginning you do not have with Terraform out of the box.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see y'all in the Discord. We'll see you on the social media, and we'll see you next time.
And we enjoyed the session as well. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Ari. Thanks for the comment. And thanks, Kostis and Dan. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Rovital.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.